Welcome to Raising Consciousness with me, Lou Burrows, where raising human consciousness happens. On this show, I'm joined by guests to cover a range of topics and have conversations that will raise human consciousness for current and future generations. Now, let's dive into today's show. Hi everyone, welcome back to Raising Consciousness with me, your host, Lou Burrows. And on today's show, we have an interesting topic, one that I don't usually talk about, mostly because I don't know much about like politics and the democratic process and kind of all that sort of stuff, but my guest does, so that's quite good. So today we have Philip Gimson on the show, who is an author and former journalist, I believe. So Philip, thank you so much for joining me here on Raising Consciousness.
My pleasure, Luke. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm curious where we should kick today's episode off, but let's start with learning a little bit more about yourself. So, in a nutshell, who is Philip Gimson, and then we will go from there.
So I'm somebody who is an occasional writer. I started my career as a journalist, and then I was in public relations for many years. And then for the last 15 years, I've been a recruiter, and I have written a novel. More than 20 years ago, I wrote a novel called Paper Story, which is still available on Amazon. And I now published a nonfiction book, my first, in early August, which is Stop Pretending America, An Outsider's Guide to Healing the Sickness on the Inside in Elections and Media. And, I wrote it, kind of in a passionate stage of my life where I had just come out of the hospital after a couple of hospitalizations, and I wanted to address the craziness in the United States related to our democracy, which is very much, teetering right now. So that was my main purpose, was to do something to help safeguard American democracy.
Excellent. And so both books are available from Amazon?
Yes. Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Excellent. And the nonfiction Stop Pretending America will soon be available on Barnes & Noble and many other sites, Goodreads, and I think it's available on Goodreads right now, so as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So I will link those in the show notes for anyone who wants to get their hands on those. But we are going to be diving a little bit in that today. Obviously, beforehand, when you come on and you asked where I'm from, I said England, the UK. So from an outsider's point of view, I guess I kind of have a vibe, like what's going on in the States. I'm not somebody who is massively into politics either, to be honest. So I kind of, I don't watch the news or anything like that. I just pick bits up. I have a lot of friends who are from the States that I've connected to through like this channel, through podcasting and entrepreneurship, etc. So if anyone also like doesn't, from an outsider's point of view, obviously they may have a very different perception on what's been happening compared to somebody who's living in the States and lives it every day, etc. like yourself. So
yes.
In a nutshell, like how would you describe what's been happening, and then where do you feel like your passion for it to talk about it and be so passionate about it to write a book about it has then come from, if we start there?
Yeah, well, I would say that the United States, for a long, long time, no one really questioned our democracy, not at the level of the last, say, 5 or 6 years. Growing up in the U.S. and seeing elections since the 1960s, there was never any, real great concern, like a public-wide concern about the credibility of elections or voter fraud. And voter fraud throughout my life in the United States has always been isolated. It's been a one-off. There's never been an election conspiracy. And what's happened in the United States over the last 5 years really is, ever since Trump came on the scene, he has sort of poisoned the airwaves with the message that if I lose the election, it'll be because of voter fraud. and there's no way I can win unless the other side conspires in a massive effort to change votes and prevent Donald Trump from getting elected. And his supporters have largely bought into this. And then the Republican Party in the United States, they've been willing participants in this charade, which has no credibility. There's never been corroborated evidence of widespread voter fraud. There continue to just be one-off instances of individual citizens who commit voter fraud, one out of every, say, 100,000. But there is no coordinated conspiracy.
Okay, I see. And for yourself, obviously, this has been a passion of yours to, obviously share this message. I'm sure, there's probably millions of other citizens in America that are also passionate about this. What do you think is like? What do you think for you is like the difference? I say to for you to be so passionate about it, to write a book and to obviously now go on podcasts and talk about it. Like I'm curious into for you, like where that kind of passion comes from, and then how that's enabled you to act, and why you decided to act.
I think because, we are spoiled in the United States. We've had a wonderful democracy. It's still a wonderful country, but our democracy now it's been poisoned by all of this propaganda. And where Trump has been tremendously effective has been, and borrowing something out of Vladimir Putin's page, is to use false, communicate false news. And Trump always accuses the media of false news. It's really Donald Trump who's the main purveyor of phony information, and he's very powerful, very effective at communicating a message. He knows a great deal about marketing and things like that. And he's kind of a natural showman, right? And I think in the United States, and this may be true in other parts of the world as well, people are addicted to drama. They're addicted to reality shows. And, reality shows, I think, have becoming a phenomenon, not just in the U.S., but worldwide. And I think what Trump gives people, and the United States, people in the United States are addicted to it, is drama. And so long as Trump is on the scene, people support him, I think, because he gives them the drama that they desperately need. What he doesn't give them is policy, good government, things of that nature, ethics, integrity, honesty. But Americans are so addicted to drama that, many Americans love Trump, even though he's poison. He is poison for the United States. And I guess what makes me different is that I care enough about America, and I care enough about democracy, and I see what's happening all over the world with the rise of autocracy. And I don't want it to happen here. I want the United States to remain a democracy, as flawed as it is.
Mm. So I suppose, like, how do you feel? So obviously that's the situation now.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how do you feel it changes? Like, what do you see as like the future, I guess? And how can how do you think things move forward? Let's say.
Yeah, there's a couple of different avenues of change. And one of the things the book is based on is template letters that I provide in the appendix. And I always say, rather than citizens accepting the viewpoints and the arguments that are made by political leaders, they have the ability to write letters to those political leaders who are challenging U.S. democracy and saying, the actual results were wrong, there's widespread voter fraud, and I prepare letters for citizens to send to those very leaders, Trump, Ted Cruz, other, purveyors of this false information, and say, okay, you're making all these claims. Send me the corroborated evidence. And what will happen is it's sort of an experiment in a citizen's role in a democracy. They will ask for it, but they will not get corroborated evidence. Why? Because it doesn't exist. The elections were were conducted legitimately like they always have been. And they were verified numerous times. There were audits conducted. And, but, those that support Trump and a lot of leaders in the Republican Party, they know it's a lie. They know it's a lie, but they continue to purvey this false narrative, and some of the public continues to buy it. So I say, okay, there's those letters, right? The other thing that will change is part of it is an evolutionary phenomenon in technology, the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, which are used in many, many industries. I think they're going to be used in the media. How so? It's going to start evaluating truthfulness, fact, and also false information in the media. And we'll start seeing artificial intelligence play out on major networks. And you're going to start, I think over time, you're going to eventually see network anchors and reporters rated from a truthfulness standpoint, from an accuracy standpoint. And those ratings will appear on screen, just like averages appear on screen for American baseball fans. I don't know if they have like data that they share in Europe on soccer, to measure a player's effectiveness. But if you want, whether you watch American football, baseball, basketball, there's all this data that's on the screen. And I think we'll see the same thing happen with the news media, and that will help foster positive change.
Excellent. So I'm going to play a little bit of maybe like devil's advocate here. So if let's just say if Donald Trump got in during the last election, do you feel that the voter fraud claims would have happened from the other side, or is it just a Donald Trump supporter thing because of his messaging? And as you said beforehand, obviously, what I know about him is obviously more of from like his entrepreneurial ventures, more so, and because he understands, therefore, marketing, etc. So, I'll kind of throw that at you.
Yeah, in the United States, Democrats have largely never challenged the election process itself in terms of the accuracy of the elections. Where Democrats did raise, an alarm about what was going on was within the political process when Russian hackers, probably supported by and encouraged by Putin, and probably money fueling it from the Kremlin, started creating false news and then promoting and buying that false news on Facebook. And there were congressional hearings on this in the United States, and we don't know to this day how much impact all of that false Russian financed news, and Trump has never publicly criticized Putin anywhere in ever since he's been on the political scene. There's something very suspicious about it, particularly since the Russians were so pro-Trump, and that actually vaulted him into the White House. That was a major contributor. So Democrats have never challenged the election results. They've more challenged what goes on with, Trump and Russia and some of the false news that, has influenced outcomes on the internet.
Okay. Again, like this is all fascinating to me because, I'm not like too much into this stuff, Philip, but it's fascinating. So, I mean, one thing that came to mind that maybe more about the democratic process that I would love to learn more about from a probably more of a selfish point of view than anything. I'll be completely transparent. Is so obviously, as I mentioned beforehand, I'm more familiar with Donald Trump, entrepreneur, businessman, etc., etc. And then him getting into politics the democratic process, etc.
Yes.
So here in the UK, and forgive me if I'm wrong, like based on my knowledge, that not just anyone
Yeah.
can become the prime minister, right? Like even if a business person, like not just
Sure.
anyone can do that, right? So what's like the process
Right.
for the states? Like how did that even happen? Like like I'm fascinated. So feel free to educate me and maybe some of our audience as well.
Well, yeah, well, Luke, it's a great question because, Trump had never held any elective office. He wasn't even, say, on a local board or anything like that. For all the years he was in New York, like he could have been on a school board or he could have been on a planning board even. He didn't even have that experience. He'd never held any office. And it's sort of reflective of U.S. values that because he was a so-called billionaire, because we to this day we don't know whether he really is. He likes to say he is, but there are many people in the American public who will judge someone based on their wealth and who will openly embrace someone who has made most of their money stealing from other people, lying, cheating the government on taxes, cheating other family members, out of their estates, all of which is part of Donald Trump's history. And but some people, the end result justifies the means. They will look at a man's wealth and they'll say, "Oh, wow, he's tremendous success." See, I have a different standard. I tend to feel that Trump is a failure. He's a marketing success. Certainly, I think he's a marketing success. But how he catapulted to the presidency is based upon that wealth, and that power attracts many other people, particularly in the Republican Party, who sort of saw him as the ultimate outsider, and so they embraced him and they thought, well, we're going to sort of build this narrative around that someone with no Washington roots, no ties to Washington, some of which is false because Trump over the years contributed to many political candidates. He was always a political animal, but he was never a political animal who actually held office. But that was how he catapulted himself, was that there were enough Republicans who said, wow, the guy's all over TV with the show The Apprentice, and he has all these buildings, many of which, today are probably deep in debt. But they bought into the false narrative that Donald Trump is some sort of great financial success, which he really isn't, frankly.
So turning our attention more, thank you for that. That's interesting because I find it fascinating. Somebody from my understanding, more of maybe it's because I watch like The Apprentice and stuff, from more of the business background, can just like seemingly come from nowhere from an outsider point of view. Again, obviously I'm in the UK, and run for office and then get office. So I found that interesting, right? So obviously, as you're hearing, you wrote a book on kind of all this stuff. I thought I would ask, but I'm kind of interested in like the media side a bit as well, and kind of getting your thoughts on the role the media plays, because I think personally, like the media's controls the narrative, and people who tend to be news lovers, and that's, in my opinion, most of society, right? Like because we've grown up with it, I guess. That whatever's on the news must be true, when not necessarily, right? So what role do you feel like the media plays, and how, and then like from that, like how, obviously this podcast is all about consciousness, right? And just us living more better lives where we're more aware of stuff.
Yes.
Because I feel like that helps us in our growth. And I kind of say that because, again, I've seen a lot of people, again, if they watch the news, they feel that's their reality, right? And then that becomes their reality, so they're living that, so it kind of goes into that dynamic a bit. Anyway, the main question is the role that you feel like the media plays, and how that we can all be more, I guess, conscious people to sort of understand that what's on the news isn't always true.
Yeah, well, the media is incredibly influential, and in many ways good, and in many ways bad. And unfortunately, with the rise in the internet, the a lot of the not so good parts of the media have been further exasperated, and I would say that the negative parts of the media are where you have a lot of these political commentary shows versus straight news. Because it used to be American news coverage on most of the major networks was simply straightforward news coverage, and then you would have a small, say, a 90-second to 2-minute commentary reserved for the end of the newscast. But what's happened over many, many years, and particularly in the era we live in, there's actually more political commentary that is on the airwaves, particularly in cable, than there is actual just straightforward news reporting. And so what happens is you have, say, a network like Fox News. They call themselves Fox News. But a lot of times what people are watching is outright propaganda. And so in the evenings on weeknights, we have 3 propagandists from Fox who are always on: Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, and Laura Ingraham. And all 3 treat their viewers to a nonstop a virtual cascade of propaganda. And in many cases, they're running with false narratives that have no basis in reality. Laura Ingraham, for example, claimed that the January 6th uprising was due to Antifa, and that there were Antifa supporters sprinkled throughout the mob, and that they sort of egged people on, and that's what led to the attack on the Capitol. There's no truth to that whatsoever. There have been over 700 people that have been charged with crimes from January 6th, and all of them are on the far right. There's not a single one who is affiliated with Antifa, and yet Fox viewers would never know this because of her program. And Tucker Carlson perpetuates all kinds of news straight out of the Kremlin. He's an opponent of Ukraine. He actually supports Russia. And I say, how can you be in American media, unless your name is Steve Bannon, who has his own podcast and who is a supporter of Putin? How can anyone for a legitimate news network support Vladimir Putin, who is up there with, Hitler and all of the despotic leaders who, have attacked people and killed some of their own citizens, as well as citizens of other countries. And Putin's track record is clear. He's a threat. He's a threat to humanity. But the right wing in the United States has profiled him as some sort of courageous, person that's protecting Christianity. It's bizarre. There's no truth to that whatsoever.
Yeah, I'll just kind of interject here. So, like, are we saying that basically, like, the fundamental is that it's more like people confuse commentary with like just plain news, and we live in more of an age where it's more commentary, and that's based on people's opinions and people's, probably I would say like own fears and insecurities and many other things that
prejudices.
Part of being human, I guess. And it's not news and going back, maybe pre-internet days that news was more focused on facts and not necessarily one's opinion. Like, that's the sort of vibe I'm getting.
Right. And in the old days, say, when I was growing up, news reporters would get fired for expressing their opinion unless they were specifically designated as a commentator for the network, and then they would have their 90 seconds to 2 minutes to offer commentary. But even then, it would, there would be standards where they would say the commentator, if he's citing certain facts or certain allegations, they need to be checked out. They need to be verified. And what Fox has done is they've gotten to a point now where they just throw allegations out. There's no fact checking. There's no apologies for making mistakes. We had Sean Hannity, who went with this whole crazy narrative that Seth Rich, a young Democrat, was killed by the Democrat Party in retaliation for the dump of the Hillary Clinton emails that went to the Russians, who then fed it to WikiLeaks. And there was no truth to that at all. Seth Rich was a young Democrat staffer who lived in Washington, and was out in the wee hours one morning, probably like a lot of young people, going to restaurants, going to bars, and he was killed on his way back to his apartment. Case has never been solved. Well, Hannity went with this whole crazy allegation that the Democrats killed Seth Rich as a retaliation for the dump of the Clinton emails, that eventually were filtered to the world through WikiLeaks. And there's no basis in reality to any of it. And so you have commentators on Fox, and Fox is not the only one, but they're the main culprit, who don't care that there are no facts to support what they're saying, but they just run with it. And that's the danger. And then they have viewers who just simply buy into it because it fits their agenda.
So, yeah, I guess what I'm wondering is if opinions are always bad, therefore, if that makes sense, because, yeah, kind of throw that out there. I don't know. That's just something that's coming to me. Like, is opinions always bad, or is it the fact that we're like kind of going around life, like operating and just believing everybody else's opinions that as the truth, and actually is to come back to a place of understanding that is just one person's opinion and not the truth, and not to necessarily buy into it. And I think personally, from my own side, like, a lot of people buy into these opinions and see them as facts because probably going a bit more to a personal kind of growth side, because they don't actually know who they are or what they stand for, right? So there's like that saying that they fall for everything, right? So they see something on the news and they fall for it because they don't really have that strong sense of who they are, their values, and what they stand for. So we'd love to get your kind of 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I mean, opinions are not a bad thing, but I think opinions without education, like without a respect for education in terms of history and facts and things of that nature, corroboration, the journalistic discipline of that if I'm going to express an opinion, that any of the data that I'm going to share with you has been verified, has been validated. And see, that's what is being lost is, opinion's not a bad thing. Opinion, though, that makes use of certain points or facts or information, that information needs to be checked out. Because otherwise, I'm not a responsible commentator or opinion maker. I'm just like this ignorant person that's throwing stuff out, like sitting on my couch and just throwing stuff out because it fits my prejudices, my point of view. But there's a whole nother level of, respect and I think deservedly so for a commentator who is absolutely committed to communicating information that has been verified, that's been checked out, that's been corroborated. Then that's different. That's a responsible commentator. And of course, people have the right to express whatever opinions they want, but an opinion that is not based on reality, fact, or corroboration is kind of worthless. Frankly, if it's being done by someone who tries to portray themselves as a journalist, because they're not, they're not in
Yeah.
that case.
Or like I think like in the media, or just it could be anyone with that sort of level of audience and exposure, I guess. I'm interested, like, one reason why I'm not political or anything is because
Hmm.
and I might discuss this more on a on a future episode or something. It is mainly because there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of heat in politics. I think that's like one way to describe it,
Yes.
and a lot of
Yes.
like how would I describe it? Like side taking, right? So a lot of separation. So you're on this side, you're on
Yeah.
that side, and I think we lose the sense of being human a bit, right? Because we create this
Yeah. Yeah.
we create this separation between each other. I also see it similar with like religion, etc., etc. So I'm curious on, like, from your perspective, on how or yeah, on how we if it's is the world in general, or if you want to talk from more of the lens through America, like come back to uh, the understanding, like, at the end of the day, we are all human beings, right? With the understanding that we may have different political beliefs and opinions, and therefore we uh, are a Republican or we are a Democrat, and that's okay. Kind of getting back to that place of that's okay. Um, Rather than a lot of the heat that's kind of been being caused, and maybe like families falling out or violence, or kind of all of this shit, to be honest, that kind of really does separate us from who we are, and the sense of being human and building those connections and stuff. So do you feel that's possible, and if so, how do you feel like we get back to that place?
Well, I do think we can get back there. I think one of the unique things, and I don't know whether it's true of the society you live in, but in the United States, it's certainly true that people watch the TV or they go onto digital sites and they feed their mind with essentially tribalistic narratives.
Mm.
Liberals watch certain networks, conservative watch certain others, Trump supporters watch a distinct brand of kinds of TV. But then, the standards we have in society, which are probably a lot like the UK, is that talking with others about politics, let's say, at either when relatives get together, or even friends, say, for a party, it's frowned upon, right? So people don't like to do it. So the reality of the way most of us are spending our lives is when we expose ourselves to media, we're being fed with all this tribalism, but then we're all told, oh, don't talk about that. You can't talk about politics, can't talk about religion. And see, I tend to feel the opposite. I feel that the only way we're going to make progress is to open up a dialogue, and
Mm.
to have people start talking to one another, and not have this taboo of like, oh God, don't talk politics, right? And I understand why people don't want to engage and talk about politics, because it so often involves, fighting and controversy and everything. But I also feel like we have to start communicating somewhere to get through all this. But, probably a big part of it too is um, people spending more time really educating themselves, and just adopting a mentality of like, I'm not just going to watch Fox News, or I'm not just going to watch CNN for that matter, or MSNBC. I'm going to feed my mind with additional sources of information, and I'm not just going to willingly swallow everything that I see and read or hear as 100% fact. I have a responsibility as a citizen to do a little bit of my own research as well.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I love that. I think communication is so important, right? And the ability to open up. And I think a lot of times, yeah, people don't, because of that fear or whatever. But yeah, I agree that it's kind of like, having more conscious conversations, right, of these sorts of issues and topics, and even maybe sometimes debates, without them overflowing into states of anger, or leading to violence, or leading to the things that actually separate us, and that really. So I definitely agree. I definitely agree with that, Philip. In the time that we have left, like, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience? Yeah, feel free to share anything that comes to mind for you.
I think that you know, I would recommend people get the book. Why? Because I'd say it's the only book out there that challenges people to find out some of these answers for themselves. And in the United States right now, we are really in a dangerous situation. Back in 2020, there were 7 states where there were false electors, people who literally committed fraud, signed their names to a document that said that Donald Trump won the election in those 7 states. He lost the election. That was verified. That was audited. And so they committed fraud. And so, the events of January 6th were just one part of an overall a coup attempt that failed. But, people will learn about that overall grand conspiracy that was committed by reading the book. They will then have the letters that they need to hold those officials that are making all these wild claims about election conspiracy, and they can send those letters out. There's also a list of fact-checking websites, which I think is one of the healthy things we've seen happen in the last several years, is that there's a whole cottage industry now of companies that are dedicated to separating fact from fiction on the web, and are in the process of evaluating websites. And also that's going to have a positive effect for advertisers, because advertisers are going to be more and more vigilant to not just spend money frivolously on the internet. They're going to want to know, well, is some of my money going to websites that are supporting misinformation and disinformation? And we're going to see companies change how they spend money on the internet. That's a good thing. The book goes into all that. So, I think there's a lot of food for thought in the book, and I'm hoping it'll have a positive impact for everybody.
Amazing. I would definitely link that down below. Before we go there, a question that has just come to me. So, like, before all of this, before Donald Trump and kind of all, him entering the political landscape, etc. In your opinion, like, where was America democracy politics beforehand? I think you kind of touched upon it before, but, like, I guess what the point I'm trying to get at, was there problems beforehand? And if there was problems beforehand, do those problems still exist? So and then you have this, so it's about fixing both. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I always feel like with any system that is running a society, and American democracy is what has run this country, that there's always been big flaws in it, right? Like people love the American Constitution, and I think it is a great document. It was a great vision by our founding fathers. But like any human enterprise, right, there are flaws in it. One of the major flaws is the Electoral College, because candidates can literally lose an election and still be declared the winner because of the way the Electoral College system works. So that's a major flaw in what our founding fathers originally created. But, within American democracy, there has always been a fundamental imbalance. Minorities for a long, long time didn't have the rights that they do today. And there's still a lot of discrimination that goes on. And also, economically and with our taxation system, there are flaws, and there is a favoritism for the rich, and many of the wealthiest corporations are not paying their fair share. So there've always been problems. But what never had really played itself out the way it has the past 5-6 years is people actually thinking that election results were fraudulent, and
Hmm.
that there was this grand conspiracy being conducted to manufacture vote totals. That had never been an issue in the United States until Donald Trump came along, and that's the real danger, is that there's a significant percent of the American public now that believes that's true.
Mm.
So,
And,
but yeah, we've
and do you
never been a
feel,
perfect
yeah.
society.
No, no, I don't think any country or society or anything is perfect, right? I was just curious because like maybe that's why people turn to vote for Donald Trump, and obviously his market, his message, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why. And then obviously since it's turned a bit more, as you've been explaining, a bit more chaotic and stuff. So it's just something that came to me. So I was just curious on beforehand and if that had an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand, like I think people for a long, long time were looking for alternatives, and there's
Mm,
always been this sort of romanticism about finding an outsider, somebody who had no
mm,
Washington connections, who was not part of the system. But the reality is, Trump was always plugged into the political system. He just wasn't in office. But his money was always going to different political action committees, different candidates. He actually contributed large sums of money to the Clintons when the Clintons were in power. So, it's always a question of, well, what has he really stood for? If he supported liberals way back when and funneled a lot of his money to them, did he just see an opportunity to of a better percentage chance of getting elected as a Republican? And
mm,
I think that's exactly what he did. But yeah, I mean, the one part of all this that is understandable is the American desire to find like a different type of political leader, someone who hasn't been running for office their whole life, and that I can fully understand. Um,
mm,
I always felt like the United States needed people like Steve Jobs, or a Steve Jobs type
mm.
person to come in and run for political office, someone with a brilliant business mind who had a desire to run for office, but Steve Jobs never did.
Mm.
So
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for today. And so people can get the books on Amazon and Goodreads, and it's soon be in Barnes and Noble, etc.,
correct.
etc. Excellent. I will link
Correct.
that
And they can
all
also
down
go to
below.
stoppretendingamerica.com. Yeah, stoppretendingamerica.com to has some information about the book as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for today. It's been interesting. So thank you for that. And yeah, I hope everyone's enjoyed today's episode. I will be back next week for another episode. So I will look forward to seeing you all, talking to you all then. Have a great week, and I will see you all soon. If you got value from this episode, found it insightful, or learned a thing or two, please leave a review where you can let everyone know that this show is worth checking out. I appreciate you so much. You'll be hearing from me in the next episode.